I pushed the sign into the ground and looked at the kids gathering up the street with thinly veiled satisfaction. "Keep off the dirt," it read. I'd seen the way their eyes gleam when the truck came to deliver it, deciding on a preemptive strike. A tall pile of fill dirt was irresistible for small children, and I needed as much of the dirt for my project as possible. Having it scattered all over the yard would make that very difficult, and I needed to post signs before the neighborhood rowdies got any ideas. I went back inside then, not wanting to field questions about my dirt. Sitting in my easy chair, pretending to watch TV, I could see them gathering around to look at the sign. They hunkered over their handlebars and looked dubiously at the sign I had stuck in the mountain of dirt in the front yard. The sign was pretty straightforward, but I wouldn't put it past these kids to find a loophole. They knew me as the cool neighbor, the single guy who gave out full-size candy bars on Halloween and sometimes played baseball in the street with them. The guy who drank on his front porch and sometimes let them fish in his canal, if it was okay with their parents, that was. On some things, however, they knew that I was unbending, and it wouldn't do to argue with me. They all looked up when I came out on the front porch and leaned against the rail to look at them. "If you're hoping to find a play in the dirt free card somewhere on top of that pile, it ain't happening." Reggie looked up, and his face was still hopeful. "Gee, Mr. McQuinty, that sure is a great-looking pile of dirt you have there." I nodded, keeping my face neutral as I tried not to smile. "Sure is, and it's for filling in gopher holes, so I'll likely need all of it. If there's any left, though, I'll be sure to let you kids know so you can trample it flat for me." They rode off down the road, sitting a little higher on their bikes as they realized they might still get to play in it. I shook my head as I watched them leave. I'd never known anyone to get so excited about a pile of dirt, except maybe for a bunch of kids. Something about all that fresh, powdery dirt just made them go a little bit crazy. As I looked at the 6-foot mound of fine white dirt, I almost felt like jumping on it myself. I went inside to finish my preparations, getting my work clothes on and finding my gloves. I sat in the living room pulling my boots on when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I glanced up, the afternoon shadows just starting to lengthen, and saw a pair of small figures standing beside the road. I paused in mid-tie, looking up to see two small forms looking at the pile of dirt. It looked to be a couple of neighborhood kids, maybe having one last look before getting back to their game. I shook my head. Kids were so predictable. I finished tying my boots and stepped out onto the front porch. "Hey, looking's fine, but I don't want to see anyone in my..." The road was empty. I looked up and down the road. The kids were already playing a game of touch football further down the cul-de-sac. And I picked up my shovel as I thought about how strange that had been. Those two must have really been booking it to make it back to their playmates so quickly. As I started scooping dirt, I thought longingly about having that kind of energy. It would certainly make this job a lot easier. I spent the rest of the afternoon filling in gopher holes. It had been a particularly bad season for them, and the dirt was a band-aid solution at best. The gophers would continue to dig up my yard until I invested in a dog or something. I kept slinging dirt until the sun grew low in the sky, one angry chuck actually coming up to growl at me before I threw a shovelful of dirt in his face. When it became too dark to see, I thrust my shovel into the pile of dirt and shook the remaining dirt off myself. The kids were finishing up their football game, heading home as the streetlights came on. They all looked longingly at the pile of dirt, but they knew better than to make a play for it while I was standing on the front porch. My cigarette winked on and off as I stood watching the sun go down, and I pitched the end into the dirt as I went inside. I was frying up some hamburgers when I heard the first tremors of laughter from my front yard. Over the sound of popping grease, I could hear the scuttling laughter of children as they played out front. I walked over to the living room window and looked out into the front yard. By the streetlight's ghostly light, I could see them playing on the mound of dirt I had out front. There were two of them, both dressed in dirty jeans and colorful shirts, both having a ball as they capered on my pile of dirt. I was out the door in a matter of seconds, yelling before the door had fully opened. "Hey, just what the hell do you think you're doing? Can't you read? Stay off the..." The streetlights were dim, but even I could see the absence of anybody in my yard. I walked over to the pile, looking around to see if someone was hiding behind it. I saw pretty quickly that wasn't going to be the case. The pile of dirt was hardly 3 feet tall, and a kid would have to get pretty low to hide behind it. I glanced up and down the street, but the only thing moving on the road was an old chip bag pushed by the wind. I looked back at the pile and was shocked to find that I didn't even see any footprints. The wide, low dirt pile still looked fairly pristine, other than my shovel marks, of course. I scratched my head and went back inside. Maybe I'd just been working too hard today. I pulled my fries out of the oven just as they started to burn. I made 2 hamburgers and added them to the pile of french fries. I tipped a beer into a chilled glass and brought both to the table. After shoveling dirt all afternoon, I was tired and ready for a bite. As I lifted the first one from the plate, I heard my stomach grumble as the grease oozed off the meat. I had just taken the first bite when I heard the metal clang of my shovel falling over. I looked up to find those kids playing on my dirt again. I came barreling out the door, my dinner cooling on my plate, as I stormed out to send these kids off. I was becoming frustrated. I'd made it pretty clear that I didn't want people on my pile of dirt. I had been pretty nice about it, posting signs and asking the kids not to mess with it, but it appeared that some of these kids weren't getting it. If I needed to be a bastard to keep these kids off my dirt, I suppose I'd have to be a bastard. I'd barely gotten 2 words out of my mouth, though, before I once again noticed the yard was empty. I was really getting tired of this. I know what I saw, and what I saw was a pair of filthy kids on my pile of dirt. No matter how many times I checked the yard, though, there was never any sign of a trespasser. The strangest part was a distinct lack of footprints, though. The sand was fresh, maybe even a little damp when you got past the top layer. The kids had been jumping on the sand like a trampoline. There should have been footprints, handprints, something. They came back 3 more times that night, but the last is the only one that really stands out. That was the worst of their appearances. They appeared again as I was finishing my dishes, and again as I sat watching TV. I came striding out to holler at them both times, but all I found was an empty yard. This was ridiculous. What the hell was going on here? I know what I saw, but they were always gone the instant I came outside. Nobody could move that fast, especially not a couple of dirty little kids. And what the hell were they doing out after dark? Most of the parents on this block didn't let their kids out after the streetlights came on. Something funny was going on here. The last time I saw them, that night at least, was just before bedtime. I'd thought the pranks were over as time slipped on. It was 11 o'clock, and I was walking through the living room to get something to help me sleep. I was still a little on edge, and I thought that a nightcap might help me calm down a bit. I was coming out of the kitchen with a tumbler of whiskey, the curtains still open on the front yard, when I saw them there. My glass slipped out of my hand as the 2 kids stood crouching on top of my dirt pile. I was speechless for a moment as the angry fire built inside me. I was furious. Who the hell did these kids think they were? They were coming up in the middle of the night, trying to mess with me. But why? I'd made a very simple request. Why were these kids tormenting me? Because I wouldn't let them play on my damn dirt pile? If I had stopped to quell my anger, I might have noticed that something wasn't right with these 2. The night air was cool on my bare chest as I came shambling out of my house like an angry bull. Who the hell do you think you are? It's almost midnight. Get your asses over here right now. I'm going to call your parents and let them know what you've been up to. I got a good mind to... They hadn't moved this time, though. They just stood on that mound of dirt like 2 scrawny scarecrows, glowering at me through the dirt caked over their face. My God, had they been eating the dirt or something? I had thought them filthy, but these kids were downright grimy. They didn't seem at all concerned with me, but I definitely had their full attention. I'd come half into the yard when I saw their eyes. They both seemed to have a nasty case of red eye. They stared at me, their eyes seeming to glow somehow, and I suddenly noticed that they cast no shadow in the dim streetlight. They should have. The dirt pile and my shovel cast a long gantry into the falling streetlight, but these 2 had nothing. I had stopped barely 20 feet from the pair when the larger of the 2 took a step towards me. When his dirty sneakers gritted against the loose earth, the red piping looked faded beneath all that mud, and I saw the earth drop over it like a hand. He opened his mouth, trying to say something, but all that came out was wet soil. Sand and mud bubbled out from over his lips, and the dirt that had covered his foot had begun to slide up his leg as well. He fell to his knees, clutching his throat as he coughed up leaves and mud as well. The sand slid over his hands and up his arms. Even as the dirt bound the first boy to the pile by his knees, they both struggled, trying to free themselves from the prison of sand, but their efforts were ultimately in vain. The sand reclaimed them both in a sudden whoosh. In a blink, they were both gone again. I walked backwards, never taking my eyes off that pile, until the door was closed between us. The next day, I set to work early. I wanted that pile of dirt out of my yard before nightfall. I worked diligently, filling in holes and putting dirt to good use. I used it to fill in a few of the potholes in front of my house even. I just wanted as much of it gone as I could manage. I no longer cared how it happened. When the kids came by on their bikes, I told them to leave. They seemed disappointed, but I didn't want them anywhere near that dirt pile. I was filling in an exceptionally large gopher hole when something caught my eye. I had nearly turned back to the pile when something pale and long made me take a second look. At first I thought it was a worm, but the more I looked, the more I thought I knew what it was. I bent down, the shovel hitting the ground woodenly, as I reached down to pick up what I hoped was a bleached piece of wood. It wasn't, though. It was cold, malleable if not unmovable, and crooked like a sea of pale, purpling flesh. The perfectly filthy nail was hardly visible at the tip of the small finger. I went back to the pile and saw the rest of the hand poking out from the bottom, minus the finger I had accidentally amputated. The cops came when I called, and they brought dogs with them, as well as the big white forensics van. They excavated the bodies of a 10-year-old boy from the bottom of the dirt pile, his face frozen in a look of terrified disbelief. He was dressed in very dirty, if not very familiar clothes, and his sneakers had that same filthy red piping that I'd seen the night before. When they lifted him free, they found that his hand was intertwined with something else that also came loose. The other boy had been about 8, and the two had died hand in hand, it seemed. The police had wanted to arrest me, or at least bring me in for questioning, but the forensics guys had figured out pretty quick that these kids had been dead for the last month. A quick search determined that they had been on the missing persons roster for about 3 weeks, and their parents had feared they'd been abducted by some pervert. They'd been playing near the sand pits before they'd gone missing, and the coroner would later find dirt and mud in their lungs and mouth. He figured they had been climbing the big sand piles out there, piles just waiting to be scooped into a truck and sold as fill dirt, when one of them had been sucked down by a pocket of air or an empty spot in the pile. His brother had tried to help him and ended up getting pulled down as well. The two had suffocated as they tried to get out and been picked up by the fill dirt as they trucked it to the company I had bought it from. It happens sometimes, the coroner had told me when I'd asked about it a few weeks later. Kids never think about that kind of thing. They just see a big pile of dirt and start climbing. I haven't seen the two since they took the bodies away, and the company I bought it from came and got the rest of it before they gave me a full refund. I hope they find peace wherever they are now. I think, from now on, I'll just hire someone to fill the holes in my yard. I don't ever want to see another pile of dirt for as long as I live. I'm in the wind now. I'm sure I'll be dead by tomorrow, but I need to let people know this thing is loose. I'm an agent with the United States government, and my station is Black Site number 7. I won't tell you my name. It wouldn't matter much anyway, but this was not how I saw my life going. I spent 6 years in Iraq, signed up right after high school. It was nothing like the recruiter told me it would be. I spent 8 hours in the blistering heat. I hauled my fair share of comrades out of firefights, and I saw a lot of crap out there that would make an ordinary person go crazier than I might be. I've had a camel spider crawl on me while I sleep. I watched friends I've known since basic get decapitated through binoculars, burned houses full of insurgents and civilians to rubble, and a lot of other things I really don't like to talk about. When I was done, they gave me my papers, thanked me for my service, and sent me home. I know I have no right to complain. Many guys didn't make it back, but home was worse. I'd spent 6 years in an active combat zone, and now I was just, supposed to come home and go back to civilian life? I spent 3 months in the civilian world. 2 of those months were spent in crappy apartments because my parents couldn't handle the night terrors and the jumpy Marine that their son had become. Every car horn, every barking dog, every firework rattling in the street had me reaching for my gun or breaking into a cold sweat when I couldn't find it. Before TJ found me, I was honestly considering killing myself. Then one day, he was just at my door with that big shit-eating grin he'd always worn in the desert. "You look like hell, Hoss. Let me get you some pancakes. I got something I want to discuss with you." TJ was my platoon leader in the sandbox. They called him the comedian because he was always smiling. always cracking jokes. He was a functional sociopath. I guess most of us were. I always admired his ability to laugh in the face of the messed up stuff we did. TJ's not his real name, clearly, but since he's still in this crap and I've left it behind, I figure the best I can do is not remind them that he's why I'm here. So he took me to breakfast. In the back of a crowded Denny's, he laid it all out for me. You got it bad, hoss, but that's okay, 'cause old Uncle TJ has the cure for you. Got a new job, familiar work that might interest you. Ever hear of Two Trees? As it happened, I had. Two Trees was a government institute that, on the surface, did a lot of medical research and clinical trials. Underneath, though, they did wet work, and anyone who was involved in covert ops knew about Two Trees. We'd worked with them a few times in Iraq, and their guys were spooky, to say the least. You're looking at the new head of Black Site number 7. I furrowed my brow at him. Congrats. Should I know what that is? Of course not. It's a closely guarded government secret. Two Trees is paying me a small fortune to keep it that way. Problem is, I need someone to curate the site for me. Someone with military training, experience with firearms, and a need for some normalcy. Know anyone that might fit that bill, Hoss? I knew what he was asking, but I didn't think I was the one he was looking for. I hadn't found work in 3 months since I'd been back, and most of that was because I couldn't settle into anything. I was constantly jumpy, constantly on edge, and that makes it hard to find work. No one wanted you doing security work or minding a gas station when every backfiring car was an enemy combatant. What would happen if I had an episode in a government facility of all places? I shook my head. Thanks, but no thanks. I don't think I'm fit for duty the way I am. Yeah, I thought you might say that. He pulled a metal tin out of his front pocket and slid it across the table. Your medical file reads like a bench work for PTSD, night terrors, irritability, being on edge, those irrational bouts of anger that got you thrown out of your parents' house. I felt defensive. How did you know about that? You'd be surprised what my level of clearance will get you. The therapist records were about as hard to get as a beer at a gas station. Well, I got a little present for you, Hoss. Welcome to the rest of your life, he said, tapping the outside of the silver case. The case was about as big as an Altoids tin. There were no markings on it, no filigrees or needless ornaments, and it had the distinctly surgical look that you usually see with military tech. I slid my hand towards it, but I didn't seem to want to touch it. Every sense I had told me to walk away right now, not to touch that thing, and just walk away from this unassuming little case. I forced my hands to pop it open instead. Inside was a pair of gray gel caps. What are these? These are the answer to your prayers. 2 of these a day will make you feel as calm and clear as you did when you were a lad of 18. No more jumping at every noise. No more reaching for your gun when a dog barks or a car backfires. Just peace of mind. Looking back, that's probably what Mephistopheles said when he spoke to Faust. What's the catch? These pills are only available through the Two Trees Corporation. Employees who agree to be part of the clinical trials get them free of charge. But they're only available to employees, he said, with a little grin. Take them. Take a day to feel the effects, and let me know what you think. Call me tomorrow and give me your answer. Enjoy a night of freedom, then make your decision. I took the pills home with me, and after a few hours of staring at them, I took them with some vodka. The effects were sudden and immediate. If you've never had PTSD, then it's hard to explain, but it's like having a loose wire and someone suddenly fixes it. Then you go back to the way you used to be. My anxiety just melted away. My fear dissipated. My unease and dread were gone, and my anger seemed like a distant memory. I was sitting in my crappy apartment, surrounded by the trappings of my depression and my anxiety, and suddenly, I felt like I had before I boarded that bus in 2003 and headed out to basic training. I was finally comfortable in my own head. It was like coming back to a safe place after years of running from danger. After the first good night's sleep I'd had since shipping out, I called TJ and told him I was in. One question, I asked. What's in the pills that makes them work so well? He was silent for a long minute, and then finally he said, You really don't want to know, Hoss. Pack your stuff. There will be a moving truck to take you to West Virginia in the morning. And that is how I came to work at Black Site number 7. I must have looked like a junkie by the time I pulled up in front of my new house. I didn't have much. The truck had taken all 4 boxes into the deep woods as I followed in my old compact. The journey took me about 16 hours, and by the time I got there, I was starting to feel the anxiety creep back in. I became angry at how slow the truck was going, afraid that this whole thing was a trick and they would kill me. By the time I arrived, I found myself wanting to die, hoping for death, so I could return to the quiet that had been in my head before. That was when I saw TJ standing at the gate of what looked like an old military checkpoint. He flashed that knowing smile and handed me another silver case. I dry swallowed the pills without a word and felt the inner peace worming its way back into my brain. Then he showed me to my new quarters. It was a little bunk room with a bed, a kitchenette, and a locker for my clothes. There was a foot locker for my personal stuff, and I was told to keep the place clean. I would be responsible for the site and its security. TJ showed me a terminal off the bedroom for monitoring and camera feeds. The compound had cameras all over the place, but I appeared to be the only person here full-time. Site's mostly for storage these days, but it's what we get up to here at night that may interest you. That's why you're here. I need someone I can trust to watch this site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 4 times a year, you'll be relieved for a week of R&R somewhere. But other than that, this is your world, Hoss. That didn't bother me. I had no problem being alone after 3 months of people. What I was curious about was what I would be doing out here. What am I looking at exactly? TJ pointed at the 3 buildings on the camera. Truck comes twice a week. Let them through the gate and don't bother them. They'll take what they need from the building and won't bother you either. Keep nosy people out. Lethal force is authorized, and don't ever go in there, or I'll have to show you where Black Site 8 is, he said with a smile. The smile didn't make it to his eyes. Don't worry about being vigilant, though. If anything bigger than a mouse moves out there, the alarms will let you know about it right away. He told me that my food would be delivered once a week, mostly MREs, and I could order anything I wanted from the terminal in the living room. There was a workout yard near the second building, and I could move through the woods if I chose, as long as I took my phone with me so I could get alerts from the console. By the way, hand me your phone, he said. When I did, he put it in his pocket and handed me a new one. That's your new phone. I'll take the keys to your car, too, and put the money in your account. This is your life now, Hoss, so don't take this job lightly. If you leave the grounds, we'll know. If you try to update social media or try to tell anyone on the outside about what you've seen here, we'll know. If you want to get married or feel like you need out, arrangements can be made after your first 5-year tour. As far as anyone is concerned, you no longer exist. Don't be stupid. Put in your 5 years, and we'll reassess your position then. He grinned again and punched me in the arm. And lighten up. This will be the easiest 5 years of your life. From that point on, I was an employee of Two Trees. TJ had been right. The first 5 years flew by. I lived on the site, spending my days working out or watching TV. I played the latest video games and watched the newest movies. Twice a week, as advertised, a truck rolled up and honked. I would check the cameras, open the gates, and they would do the rest. They would honk when they were ready to leave, and I left them alone. The trucks always had the Two Trees logo on them, and they never popped in to give me any crap, and I never went out to give them any. I never tried to get into the warehouses. I'd been a soldier long enough to know how to check my curiosity, and the scares were minimal. The food kept coming, the pills kept coming, and kept me in the right mind, too, and it was pretty peaceful, all told. The alarms, to my knowledge, only went off 3 times in that first year. 2 of those times, it was a deer who had wandered too close. The first time it happened, I had slunk out in a panic, service pistol in hand and boxer shorts flapping. As I rounded the first warehouse, I drew down on a very surprised doe who darted away before I could draw a bead on her. It was kind of a special moment for me. I had never seen a deer up close, and as it ran away, I was glad I hadn't shot it. The third time the alarm went off, it was a person, though. It was the first person I'd seen in 3 months. I'd been sitting at the console one night watching the latest Marvel Avengers movie. I think it might have been Infinity Wars. When the alarm went off, I paused the movie, expecting to see a deer or a rabbit on the monitor. My eyes went wide, though, when I realized it was a person. He had a crowbar. He was attempting to pry the door open. He must have come out of the woods because if he had driven up, I would have known about it sooner. It had been 3 months since I'd seen another person. The last one had been Agent Daughtry, who'd come to relieve me for a week of R&R in September. The idea of seeing a person not connected with Two Trees made me feel weird. Even when you were on R&R, you went to a company resort or a company place full of company people. This stopped you from getting a little too drunk and talking about all the stuff you did for your country. It was a great idea, but It meant you had nearly no interaction with civilians. I took my pistol out and crept up on him in near silence. When my foot came down on an extra crunchy stick, he turned his head and noticed me. He raised the crowbar as if to attack, and the rest was instinct. The gun went off without me having even spoken to him, reflexes taking over and dropping the threat before it could become a real danger. His left eye popped like an overripe fruit, and he fell down on the hard December ground. I called TJ, and he and some of the other men in suits came to assess the damage. "You did just right, Hoss. He was a threat to the facility and needed to be put down. Don't think for a minute that this reflects poorly on you." "What will you do with him?" I asked. TJ smiled. "Immediate disposal, Hoss. Think you got the stomach to help us?" I found that I did, and once he was doused in gasoline, we set him ablaze at the edge of the property. They gave me a week of R&R for that, and when I came back, TJ must have decided that I was worthy of being brought in on certain things. The alarm went off about a week after I'd come back from R&R, and I saw a black car rolling up the front gate. TJ stepped out of it and waved as it stopped in the concrete roundabout, other men getting out as well. I slid my shoulder holster on and went out to meet him. It was 11 p.m., and a visit this late was highly irregular. As I approached the vehicle, two guys in suits were bringing a man with a bag on his head out of the car. He was wearing scrubs, his hands bound behind his back, and I could hear him crying beneath the black hood he wore. I looked between them, waiting for an explanation, and TJ threw an arm around me and walked me towards the spot where we had burnt the trespasser. "Hoss, I think it's time that we bring you in on the second reason for black sites. You see, sometimes Two Trees has assets that need to be eliminated. The black sites are often used for this purpose. It's always the responsibility of the site's caretaker to carry out the elimination. Fringe benefits, I suppose you could say." "Why wasn't I told this before?" I asked, feeling indignant. "I'm no murderer." "Oh, well, those combatants in Iraq will be glad to hear that, won't they?" he said almost snidely. "That was war, TJ. This is murder. Think of this as war too, Hoss. These people are enemies, and they need to be eliminated for the good of the public safety. It's part of the job, Hoss, a part I know firsthand that you're capable of." They put the man on his knees in the middle of the burn spot, and I could hear him praying under that hood as we stood around him. "Put him down, Hoss. That's an order," TJ said. "And if I won't?" I said, looking at him icily. The two men on either side drew their guns, and TJ grinned. "Then I'm afraid that these men will have to execute both of you. Come on, Hoss. Don't throw this away over some nobody. He's no different than the man outside the warehouse." Looking back, I kinda just wish I'd let them shoot me. But I guess if I had, you'd never know about any of this. Instead, I drew out my gun and put a bullet in his skull, glowering at TJ as his buddies put their guns away. "You made the right choice, Hoss. Who knows, you might not have to do this more than a dozen times in the next 4 years." On that note, he was wrong. I executed an asset a month after that. They were mostly people in scrubs, people in lab coats, doctors, researchers, people who had likely tried to steal from whatever facility they worked at. They were men, women, old men, and scared 20-somethings. I never bothered to learn their names. They were just assets that needed to be eliminated. I became kinda numb to the process. We burned them afterwards. Gasoline and fire made it like they were never there. The spot near the edge had a charred look to it for a while after that. At the end of 5 years, TJ came to see me and asked if I wanted to re-up. What happens if I walk away?" I asked. I was eating dinner when he came by, and he had sat down to have a plate of fettuccine with me. Given my free time, I had learned to do a good number of things that I couldn't before. I became a pretty good cook. I learned to play the guitar, read every book on the shelf I had bought to hold them, and there was a chainsaw out back along with some sculptures I had made with it. I couldn't say I hadn't enjoyed my time here, the killings aside, but I was curious to know if they'd actually let me leave. "You'll be allowed to return to the real world. Your bank account fuller and your retirement substantial. Just watch what you say out there. I'd hate to have to bring you back for your replacement to put a bullet in." I ended up signing up for another 4 years. I shouldn't have done that. I was 8 years deep when they brought the girl in the black bag to me. It was 2 a.m., and I had started to think about going to bed when the alarm went off. I saw the town car rolling up and looked for TJ. He was not the one that climbed out, however. This guy had his hair slicked back, his suit a perfect blue pinstripe. He didn't wave at me, and I felt a sense of dread as I grabbed my gun. Somehow I expected TJ to be under that bag this time. The man's name was Stein, and luckily he did not have TJ under that bag. What he did have was a kid with a thick black bag over their head. I couldn't tell at first if it was a boy or a girl. They were dressed in baggy clothes, Salvation Army rags that a homeless guy would be embarrassed to wear, and they were crying loudly under their hood. 2 familiar men had the kid, and they both looked stoic about the whole matter. Stein didn't say anything, just led the procession over to the charred spot and put the kid on their knees. When he didn't take the hood off, I did it myself. He winced, but he didn't stop me. This was my place, my job, and I had garnered a reputation for being a professional, a reputation I was about to ruin. The bag came off, and the little girl's tear-streaked face came into view in the harsh fluorescence. Her hair was cut short, dirty blonde, and her face was covered in bruises. Her nose looked broken, her lip split. The blood trickled down her face like red tears, and they mingled with her actual tears as they fell to the damp earth. I sighed, looking at Stein as the gun stayed at the ready. The hell is this? Stein looked surprised. It's an asset. TJ said you could handle these for us. Handle the asset. This is a kid, barely old enough to wipe her own ass. What could she have possibly done? Stein's face was stony. Yours is not to question, soldier. Liquidate this asset, or be liquidated. I looked at the kid, her whole face shaking as the tears and blood fell, and I thought about watching her head pop like a grape. This wasn't some scared adult, some stoic old man, some praying woman, or some cursing thing in a sallow skin. This was a kid. I had killed a lot of people, more in my time here than I ever had during war, but I was still a professional. Professionals had standards. No, I said. Stein blinked. What? No, I don't kill kids. Do it yourself. The 2 men drew their guns, and I was transported back in time. I was standing there, 2 days after Christmas, watching TJ grin and tell me the rules. Now I was standing in the woods, the autumn leaves carpeting the ground, feeling sure that it would soon drink both my blood and the girl's. I'll give you till the count of 3 to kill the girl. After that point, you will both be executed. 1. Their guns were unwavering, but so was my resolve. 2. I closed my eyes and prepared to die. 3. I heard a sound like wet concrete splitting open. It was followed by a high-pitched scream and a pair of bodies hitting the ground. I opened my eyes and saw Stein running towards the town car, his composure gone. The 2 men who'd been holding me at gunpoint were bleeding out on the ground from large, grisly neck wounds. As I watched Stein run, a rust-red something snapped out and caught him in the back of the neck, dropping him inches from the town car. The red thing protruded from the front of his neck, and he gasped futilely as he lay dying. I looked back in the direction of the thing that had snapped out and saw that the girl was now a mass of red spikes, segmented like spider legs. Her face had split down long ways, forcing her face into a grisly sideways maw. The area between the teeth glowed a deep red, and I could see the eyes on the girl's face blinking erratically. The 2 halves of her smile grinned at me, and the effect was a little dizzying. I figured for the second time that day that I was going to die, but she scuttled off into the woods instead, walking on her strange spidery appendages as she crashed through the trees. I stood there for a few minutes, not quite sure I believed I wasn't dead, and then I started running too. I crashed through the woods for hours, running in no particular direction, sure that at any minute the creature or a helicopter from 2 trees would fall on me and either rip me to pieces or just blow me away. I was blundering off with no wallet, no cell phone, just my gun and the clothes I'd been wearing. Was the phone how they tracked me? TJ hadn't said as much, but I kind of figured it was. When the ground went out from under me, I felt the air drop out of my lungs. I fell 5 feet off the muddy ledge and skinned my hands. My knees hurt where I had landed on them, and I realized pretty quick that I had fallen onto the road. If I thought it might be an illusion, the headlights that pinned me to the ground a moment later left me with little doubt. I was kind of numb to the idea of dying at this point, and I just lay there waiting to be run over. Thankfully, the truck stopped, and after a short conversation with the driver, he offered to take me into town. That's how I came to be here in this dingy hotel that just happens to have a computer in the lobby. I sold the gun for about $500 and figured I'd disappear as soon as I'm done writing this. They know I'm gone now, but I don't know if they think I'm dead or if they think I ran. Either way, they'll find me. I'm pretty sure of it. I'm more worried about the little girl that's loose in the woods, and whatever it is that's living beneath their skin. If you see a young girl with short, dirty blonde hair, do not approach her. I don't know if she killed those men to get away, or if she killed them because she wanted to, but she should be considered dangerous if you encounter her in the wild. And if a man from 2 Trees offers you a job, do not become the new curator of Blackside 7. The job is definitely not at all what it appears to be. Susan smiled as she watched Gus paw at his reflection in the mirror. "Did you find another cat to play with?" she asked, and Gus looked back with a meow before pawing at his reflection again. She was glad that Gus had found someone to play with, even if it was just his reflection. Gus had been depressed lately. They say that having only one cat could lead to this sort of thing. Cats are social animals, after all. Gus couldn't really play with any of the strays outside Susan's apartment because she was on the 3rd floor and a little out of reach for even the most nimble of the wandering felines. That didn't stop Gus from standing on her balcony, though, meowing at the cats below and trying to get their attention. Susan thought it was kind of sad, watching him paw at the screen as he called down to the cats who lived their lives in blissful freedom. But the apartment contract had been very clear on their 1 pet per unit policy, and Susan didn't want to move just so Gus could have a playmate. Gus was a big orange tomcat that Susan had found wandering near her parents' house before she moved out. He'd been a scrawny little kitten when she'd found him, and she had fallen in love with him almost instantly. Susan had just gone through a bad breakup when she had stumbled across the sad little kitten near the garbage cans one morning. The little fuzzball had helped her get through her loneliness, and she liked to think that she had helped him as well. When she moved out of her parents' house at the end of the year, Susan had taken the little cat with her. She and Gus had been roommates ever since. Gus was a great companion, and didn't seem prone to the midnight zoomies or the sometimes destructive behavior her friends complained about in their cats. Gus liked his scratching post, snuggling in bed with Susan until it was time for her to get up, and eating his own food instead of hers. His only real issue seemed to be his loneliness, and Susan could hardly hold that against him. Watching him play with his reflection in the mirror was as cute as it was sad, like a kid playing with his imaginary friend because he couldn't seem to make any real ones. Susan watched him as she got ready for work, and she pulled out her phone as she took some video for Instagram. The scrawny little kitten had grown into a regal orange ball of fur, and to watch him paw at the surface of the mirror was insanely cute. He would cock his head and meow at his reflection sometimes, looking confused at the cat in the mirror, before going back to pawing at the glass. Susan smiled, but there was something just a little off-putting about that confused head turn now and then. She left him staring at himself in the mirror, his game forgotten, as he seemed to be talking to the orange cat in the mirror. Susan came home to find him still sitting in front of the mirror. She asked him if he'd been there all day, and Gus just looked back and meowed before looking back at the mirror again. He was staring at himself, his ears moving back and forth, seeming to Susan like he was having a conversation with his reflection. Growing up with cats, she had seen them sit next to each other and do just that same thing, and Gus's eye contact was more than a little interesting as he watched himself in the mirror. She tried to ignore him as she slid into her PJs, but it was hard the longer it went on. "Come on, Gus, want to watch a movie with me?" she said, patting the bed as she fiddled with the TV. Gus looked up, meowing happily, but then turned back to the mirror and did an oddly unsure little head cock as he took a few steps towards the bed. In the end, Susan had to come get him and take him over to the bed as the poor old Tom watched the mirror. Susan saw nothing out of the ordinary, the mirror cat just scooped up by her own mirror reflection, but this behavior was wandering into the realm of creepy rather than cute. Gus sat with her happily as Susan watched Friends for the 1000th time, but she caught him glancing back at the mirror more than once as she stroked his silky fur. He wasn't the only one. Susan couldn't help but glancing at it as well, looking at the mirror as if she expected to see something out of the ordinary. She didn't, but it was definitely starting to creep her out. Susan let her keys fall into the bowl by the door, calling for Gus as she slid her shoes off. It had been such a long day. A creepy old man had hit on her at work, the customers were rude, and Susan sometimes wondered why she didn't just quit. She could do better than an assistant manager at a grocery store, and she knew it. If it hadn't been for Gus in this apartment, she'd have likely walked away a while ago. Speaking of Gus, where the heck was he? He almost always came to greet her at the door. She called him again, but there was no response. She went to the bedroom and huffed out in mock outrage when she saw him sitting in front of the mirror again. "Okay, Furface, this is getting to be a little much. It was cute at first, but now it's super creepy." He meowed pitifully when she picked him up, pawing gently as he tried to get away, but she took him over to the bed and sat down with him. He watched her dutifully as she got changed, his fluffy head turning back to the mirror from time to time as Susan slid into her pajamas. And she couldn't help but glancing at it as well. She wasn't sure, but Felt like she could see something moving there when she wasn't giving it her full attention. The mirror was the large rolling kind that the apartments often came with, the one on the closet doors. You could see the whole room in it, and it slid to the side on tracks if you needed something out of the closet. It was a nice amenity to have when you were getting ready in the morning, but it was starting to creep Susan out the longer she looked at it. She got that spidery feeling as she put her back to it, like something was watching her. When she pulled her hair into a ponytail and turned to put it up, she almost dropped her scrunchie. Gus was staring at her, head cocked, as he watched her from the front of the mirror. She stepped back, startled, and when her legs bumped against the chair in front of the vanity, she sat down hard. Something came off the bed then, and she heard Gus meowing as he looked at her as if to ask if she was okay. Susan looked back at the mirror and saw that it was empty again, save for her own surprised face and the furry reflection of Gus as he stood by her leg. That night was the first time she covered the mirror. She took some thumbtacks and an old throw blanket and used them to cover the surface. It was silly. She knew it was silly. But she felt better when the mirror's surface wasn't looking at her anymore. Gus walked over to inspect her work, and Susan picked him up as he began to paw at the blanket. Gus would just have to get over it, she thought, and she took him to bed and put something on to distract her and her fears. As she scratched his ears, she felt better, and as the night went on, she almost forgot all about her silly fears from earlier. When she woke up, though, she saw that the blanket had been pulled down, and Gus was again talking to himself. This became a daily routine for her. The first thing she did when she got up or got home from work was to cover the mirror and tell Gus to stop pulling the blanket down. Gus would meow when she did this, looking at the blanket and pawing at the covered surface of the mirror, but Susan was unmoving in her decision to keep the blanket up. She would usually pick Gus up as he pawed pathetically at the blanket and take him off to pet him, but it never stopped him from coming back to it. It never stopped him from uncovering it again, and Susan just accepted that this was Gus's new obsession. The cuts on her big fur ball were a little harder to ignore, though. Sometimes, while stroking his silky fur, Susan would encounter a scratch or a bite and wonder how exactly he had gotten it. They weren't the sort of wounds a cat could get from just scratching themselves. At least she didn't think they were. When she noticed a bite on the tip of his ear one afternoon, she actually searched the house to see if another cat might have gotten in somehow. His food bowl never emptied any quicker than usual, and there was never any extra scat in the box. If there was some secret cat living in the house, it was extremely quiet when she was there. The only strange thing was Gus's melancholy seemed to have disappeared. His mood had improved, and he spent less time meowing to the cats below the balcony. The only change was that she had to shoo him away from the mirror constantly. If he wasn't in her lap being petted, Gus was at the mirror or at the blanket that covered it. He never took it down while she was there, but he would put his face underneath it or just stare at it like he could hear someone talking. Susan found this extremely off-putting, but what could she do? The mirror was attached to the closet door, and without it, Gus would be free to leave his long orange fur all over her clothes that she had hanging in there. Also, as much as it creeped her out, she couldn't stand to think of Gus being sad again while she was at work. Then, one day, something changed. She came home to find the blanket down and Gus looking at himself as he always did. "Seriously, Gus? This is getting annoying. I hate having to put this blanket back up every..." But she stopped when Gus turned his amber eyes to stare at her. The two held their gaze for a few moments, but Susan couldn't help but hear the voice of her subconscious as it screamed that this wasn't her cat. It looked like Gus, it sat like Gus, and was a perfectly adorable little ball of orange fluff, but his eyes were different. They were the same amber gold they had always been, but today they were filled with hate. No, not hate, Susan supposed. It was something else, like a king looking at a mud-covered serf. Not with pity, and certainly not with any desire to help it. Gus looked at her with scorn and something akin to disgust. How exactly a cat could portray these things with its fuzzy little face, Susan didn't know, but that's what it was. Gus loathed her. She suddenly caught him by the scruff, and when he hissed at her, Susan realized it was the first time she'd heard him do that. He swiped a fat ginger paw at her, and Susan almost dropped him as his claws sliced her wrist. Gus growled and cried in his angry little voice, a voice that was suddenly less cute than usual, and Susan tossed him into the hall and closed the door. Gus bumped at it, hissing and yowling, and Susan was surprised when she realized that her back was against the door. It was like she thought he might just come through the door. She locked it just in case and walked into her bathroom as she washed the cut with soap and water. It wasn't very deep, but the 3 long scratches had been right across her wrist. She had just finished putting some Bactine on it and looking for a Band-Aid when she heard Gus's pitiful meow from the other room. That sounded more like the lovable fluff Susan knew, so she slapped the Band-Aid on and went to open the bedroom door. Perhaps she had just startled him as he had startled her. She hadn't grabbed him by the scruff of the neck since he was a kitten, and he was quite a bit heavier now. Susan suddenly wondered if maybe she had hurt him, and she opened the door as she prepared to pull him into a hug. "Sorry, Gus, you just scared me. I wasn't—" But she opened the door and noticed that he wasn't there. She checked the hallway, but Gus was nowhere to be found. Susan shrugged, tallying it up to strange cat behavior, and finished doctoring her arm before going to start dinner. As she cooked, she kept expecting to see Gus come out and sniff or rub up against her leg. Gus was always so curious, and he always came to have a look when she was cooking or watching TV. He had even jumped into the shower with her a few times, though he always instantly regretted it. She began to feel guilty about what had happened earlier and just wanted to find him so she could pet him and say she was sorry. Even so, those weird eyes kept coming back to her. She couldn't shake the idea that that cat hadn't been her Gus. She didn't see him again until she was cleaning up and getting ready to take the garbage out. Susan was in a bit of a hurry as she tied the bag up and started pulling it out of the can. The plastic pan the chicken had come in had likely leaked into the bottom of the bag, and she wanted to get it to the dumpster before it dripped onto the floor. She hadn't seen Gus since she'd put him out, not even as she ate chicken Alfredo on the couch. He was likely still sulking somewhere, but she figured he'd come out when it was time for bed, and all would be forgiven by tomorrow. She thought she might have heard him, though, and he sounded upset wherever he was. Susan had cocked an ear several times as she cooked, listening to the meows of a familiar cat from the back of the house. She had called him, even taken the tuna he liked to coax him out, but he had never poked his head out or shown any interest in any of it. Susan had looked all over for him a few times, but as the sound of her sauce bubbling began to sound more like burning, she always returned to the stove. She walked to the door with her swinging bag of trash, and when the door came open with a loud creak, she heard claws scrabbling on linoleum. Susan saw an orange lightning bolt come barreling out from behind the china cabinet and make a break for the open door. She moved purely by chance, and Gus hit the trash bag as he yowled and smacked against the cans and packages inside. Susan dropped the bag, no longer mindful of the chicken drippings, and reached for Gus before he could escape. He had never tried to run away before, not even as a half-starved little kitten, and when her hands settled around him, he yowled and slashed at her furiously. He clawed at her hands, swiped at her face, and Susan stepped back when one paw scored her across the cheek and thought about the garbage a little too late. Whether it was the chicken leavings or some other liquid, Susan felt her feet shoot out from under her as she fell against the china cabinet. Her head smacked against the bulky old thing, and everything went fuzzy as she watched Gus run off into the night. She called his name distantly before passing out and waking up somewhere very different. Susan woke up in the hospital. Her mom was reading a magazine, but as Susan groaned, she called for the nurse and leaned in to have a look at her. The nurse came on the run, and Susan was soon poked and prodded and examined by her mother and several people in scrubs. She was confused and a little scared, and when she asked what had happened, it took her dad coming in from the cafeteria to shed any light on the situation. The complex had called her parents, since they were her emergency contact, to let them know that a neighbor had found her passed out in her doorway. They had called an ambulance, and she had been rushed to the ER with a head wound. She had spent 3 days unconscious, her concussion pretty substantial, and her parents had been worried sick. She asked her dad if he'd been to the apartment, and if he'd seen Gus, but he said he hadn't done much more than put some food in a bowl and lock the place up. "He's probably okay, sweetie. Cats are pretty self-reliant. I'll go back tonight and make sure he has food and water, though." They wanted to keep her at the hospital until they were sure that she was okay, but Susan was adamant that she needed to leave. Gus had gotten out, and she needed to find him. He had been scared by the garbage bag and startled when she grabbed him. He hadn't meant to scratch her. He was probably cold and scared and waiting for her to come home, and she started to cry when they told her it would be a few more days before she was released. Her dad didn't help matters much. He checked on Gus, but said that he must have gotten out. His food bowl was still full, and he hadn't come home when her dad had called him. He had looked around, but he hadn't seen any sign of him. "I'm sure he's just scared and waiting for you to come back. He'll probably meet you at the door when you come home from the hospital," he assured her, his face showing a lot of worry. She came home 3 days later, after the hospital had run every test they could think of, and Susan was greeted by nothing but a plain beige door and a note from her neighbor wishing her a speedy recovery. She opened the front door thinking maybe he would be there, but the house was cold and empty. It felt lonely without Gus there to welcome her, and she decided then that she had to go look for him. Maybe he was close by, playing with the cats he had seen from the balcony. She would get some treats and call him, and hopefully he would come back after some coaxing, and they could be a family again. She was halfway down the hallway when she recognized a pitiful meow from her bedroom. She came through the door looking frantically for Gus. Had he gotten stuck in the bedroom? How had he been eating and drinking this whole week? She expected that he would come pelting out when the door opened, but he was nowhere to be found. She started looking for him under the bed and in the closet, but when the same sad meow came from behind her, she turned and found the source. It was Gus. He was just as fluffy as she remembered him, and it broke her heart to see how thin he looked under all that fur. He looked troubled, his eyes darting around as he put a paw up and pleaded for her to help him. He looked sorry, like he would do anything if she could just help him out of this. And as she approached him, Susan could feel her tears coming down in a torrent. Gus pressed his paw against the mirror. His toes were visible from the other side, and as he pressed and shoved, she could see he was becoming upset. Gus was stuck inside the mirror, his world nothing more than a little room, the one he had loved so much. Susan put a hand up to the mirror, covering his little paw with hers, and only then noticed that she didn't have a reflection. She sat and wondered if she'd have to watch her poor cat Gus waste away, unable to help him, and she laid her forehead against the glass as she cried all the harder. There once was a man with ears, you see, in the dead of the night he'll come for thee. He'll drag you into the woods to scream, and there your bones he'll gnaw. Soon shall the bunny man come to take you away from your dad and mum. Soon shall the bunny man come, and your soul shall belong to him. Stop it, Catherine! I'd scream, but Catherine just cackled and sang it all the louder. I can still remember my sister's face because of that ghoulish smile she wore while she tormented me. We grew up in New Zealand, so the shanty was something old that we changed for our own purposes. Many of the kids sang it, but my sister was the first to adopt it into something different from the original. A few kids had added some creative lyrics to the original song, usually something about farty men or something, but Catherine had turned it into a song about the bunny man. She was forbidden from singing it at school. By our parents and teachers, and she took it as an excuse to sing it for me at every opportunity. It was usually sung low, under her breath, so my parents couldn't hear it, so she could deny it when I began crying about it. It was in poor taste anyway. The bunny man may have been an urban legend, but the man going around kidnapping children was very real. That summer, 13 children had gone missing in the city we lived in. All of them were from poor families like ours, who lived in tenement buildings, much like ours. They always disappeared in the middle of the night after being lured out of their houses, and there was always some sign left behind that tied them together. Whether it was spray painted on their door, the fence behind their house, or the sides of the building they lived in, the calling card was always left in plain white spray paint for the police to find. A white rabbit head in a white circle, the sign of the bunny man. My sister had started humming the little shanty after the 7th kid had gone missing. I had heard her in her room, working through the lyrics as we did homework. She would hum them to herself in a distracted way that people often do while they're trying to figure something out. As she scratched away at the math problem, she would argue with herself and make corrections to the grisly little shanty she was constructing. I would shudder to myself as I heard what she was writing, and I think I might have become her horrified little barometer. The more I shuddered, the more lyrics I heard that stayed in place. By the time school started again in August, her shanty had taken form, and she began her reign of terror. Catherine and I were 2 years apart. I had started 6th grade, and she had started 8th, and she seemed to delight in terrorizing the other girls in my class with her Bunny Man song. She would walk behind groups of students, humming the tune at first as they walked from class or to lunch. Then she would begin singing the words to herself, low at first, building volume, until a few of them started to hear what she was singing and become noticeably upset. Then she would run up behind the group, caterwauling the last verse as she sent them screaming and running in all directions. That's how she had earned herself a suspension from school and a grounding from our parents. That's why she was home that night, the night of December 15th, the night the Bunny Man did indeed come. We were both grounded that night, actually. My sister was grounded after being suspended from school for her Bunny Man shenanigans, but she didn't much care. She was happy to put off schoolwork and watch TV all day and suffer the wrath of our parents. I, however, was grounded for encouraging these antics by saying I had seen the Bunny Man. It wasn't a joke, though. I wasn't trying to encourage Catherine in her bad behavior. I had woken up for the 6th night in a row, hearing someone humming that shanty and going to the window to see who it was. I couldn't actually be hearing anyone, I realize now. Our loft was on the 5th floor, looking out on a vacant lot and the road behind the building. There was no way I should be able to hear anything. I could, though. I can clearly remember hearing that shanty, hummed in a gravelly baritone that sounded as though it were right outside the window. The first few times I heard it, I went to the window and looked out on the lot. In the moonlight, he was standing there, in the road, a man in a dingy gray rabbit costume, his eyes glowing yellow and his ears cocked almost jauntily. My parents would hear me screaming and come running into the room to see what was going on. They would find me on the floor, screaming and pointing out the window, always gibbering about the Bunny Man. After the 3rd night, I didn't even go to the window. I would lie in bed and sob as the shanty bore its way into my brain. I would sob and call for them, screaming about the damn Bunny Man, until finally, my father couldn't take it anymore. That's why both of us were grounded on the night in question, the night our parents went out. It was supposed to be a family night. We were supposed to go out and have a real family meal, see a movie, maybe get some ice cream. Instead, my father had been using it as a punishment for my sister after she'd gotten in trouble. We 3 would go out and have fun while she stayed home and did not. My mother, however, thought this was a little harsh, and she had been pleading with him to reconsider. This had made him a little short, and after being woken up by my screaming all week, he had reached his limit. He grounded me as well, thinking I was trying to egg my sister on with all this Bunny Man nonsense, and announced that he and my mother were going on a date instead. "We will be back at 10. You 2 are to be in bed by 8:30. If I come in and you're still awake, you will be severely punished." Then they left, and for a few hours we'd gotten along pretty well. Catherine made dinner, heating up some canned pasta in the microwave, and then we'd watch some TV as the sun set and the evening wore on. It wasn't until 8, when I got off the couch and started for bed, that she started in on her old ways. She asked what I was doing, and when I told her I was going to get ready for bed, she asked me why. "You heard, Dad. If we're still up when he gets here, we're going to get in trouble." "Pfft, probably just scared the Bunny Man will hear you awake and come get you." "I am not," I lied. "R2, you're in such a hurry to go to sleep, so the Bunny Man will come and take you away." She leaned towards me, grinning that awful grin. "Oh, there once was a man with ears, you see." I put my hands over my ears and started running away as she sang all the louder and chased me. "In the dead of the night, he'll come for thee." "Catherine, stop it," I sobbed. We were running up the hall, and as I wheeled into my room, I tried to slam the door and lock her out. She battered the door aside and bore down on me, grinning and singing as I cowered beneath the window. I was covering my head with my arms, sobbing uncontrollably as I tried to block her out. She stalked towards me, bellowing the song now and scritching her hands like claws as she walked towards me. "Soon shall the Bunny Man come to bring..." But she stopped suddenly, and as the silence stretched on, I opened my eyes and looked up to find her looking out the window as she loomed over me. She was staring out the window, transfixed by whatever she saw there, and this new game was almost scarier than the shanty. Her face held a look I was unused to seeing. She was startled, unsure of what she was looking at, but it also appeared that there was terror there. Something outside the window was really spooking her, and I scrambled up to peek under her arm so I could see too. It seemed I was peeking into one of my nightmares. Standing in the road, right under a streetlight, was a man in a tattered gray bunny costume. It wasn't like a Halloween costume, some of which looked like pajamas more than costume, but it was a full suit of coarse-looking gray fur. The fur was matted and dark in places, kinky and tangled like a stuffed animal that needs to be brushed. The head was obscured by a black hood, some kind of costume hood that just slid over the head, and the face was a flat black nothing as it stared at our building. No, not at our building, as it stared at us. On top of the hood, someone had stapled a pair of thin, emaciated gray rabbit ears, one of which bent at an almost jaunty angle. He stood on the street and stared up at us, my sister and I frozen in terror at the sight of the legendary Bunny Man. All at once, I heard a gruff, tuneless humming from the street that sounded startlingly like Catherine's shanty. He had no words to go along with it. He only hummed and stared, and I think we both felt an almost magnetic desire to stare back at him. It was like the scene in a scary movie where the monster's out in the open, and you pray that none of the characters are stupid enough to go confront him. In your heart, though, you know that one of them is. Catherine, it appeared, was that one. I caught her by the arm as she turned from the window. She looked back at me, her face full of confused anger and unsure deliberation. She was clearly at odds with herself, and my sister was not someone who was used to being unsure of her actions. She was a brat, and she was a terror, but I had always kind of believed that everything she did was a calculated course of risk and reward. This was something else, though. This was her acting against her will. After all, she had sung about the Bunny Man coming for others, and now it appeared he had come for her instead. She jerked her hand away and left the room. When I heard the front door open and close, I moved back to the window, waiting for her to appear. The Bunny Man went right on humming, right on watching, as though he was trying to call me as well. I felt the pull. Really, I did, but my fear kept me rooted to the spot. I clutched the windowsill tightly, the paint chipping a little as my fingers gripped it, and I would find splinters under my nails the next day, though I didn't notice them at the time. Then, she appeared in the backyard, walking like a sleepwalker, and going to him as she vaulted the chain-link fence between the yards and the road. He reached for her, and now I could hear both of them humming that hateful song and staring up at me. It filled my head like a hive of bees, and I knelt my head against the glass as I prayed that it would stop. There would be no way I could resist if they both sang, and I could feel the pull as they tried to drag me out the door as well. After about 60 seconds of them humming and staring, she took his hand, and the two of them disappeared up the road. My parents came home 3 hours later to find me curled up on the floor of my bedroom, sobbing and gibbering as I rocked and mumbled about the Bunny Man. They searched the house, thinking that my sister had gone too far. She had finally scared me too much, and now she was going to have to answer for it. As my mother sat with me, trying to console me, my father tore up the house looking for Catherine. He clearly expected her to be hiding somewhere inside, probably running when she heard the front door open. When he couldn't find her inside, he went looking for her at her friends' houses. Their parents told him, often grumpily, that they hadn't seen Catherine, but they would call if they did. He got worried, going to look up and down the street for her, expecting her to be hidden somewhere in fear of retribution. All the while, Mom tried to calm me down and get a straight answer out of me. After about an hour, I started talking about the Bunny Man and how he had come to get us, how Catherine had left with him. She started to get angry, telling me that she was tired of hearing about the damn Bunny Man. However, when I refused to deviate from my story, she started to take me a little more seriously. The police were called, the neighborhood was searched, people were questioned, and the woods were combed for the next week and a half. No sign was ever found of my sister or the Bunny Man. No sign was ever found of any of the children abducted by the Bunny Man that year. That was 15 years ago now. The Bunny Man took only one more child that year, a 7-year-old, on Christmas Eve, and then was never seen again. They never found the remains of any of the children he kidnapped, and no one was ever arrested in connection with the kidnappings. There was never any bunny suit found or a murder weapon discovered in the woods. Whoever was doing this had just stopped. I'm 27 now. My own daughter is 8. Her dad's not really in the picture, which leaves a lot of time for just us. I was getting ready for bed one night, Emily playing in her room before bedtime, when I heard something that made me stop dead in my tracks. The tune, a familiar tune that everyone in town knows, crept up the hallway. The tune wasn't what stopped me, though. It was the lyrics that made me shiver. The words she sang transported me back in time, and suddenly I was 12 years old again, watching my older sister creep towards me as she sang the same hateful words. However, the voice that sang them was childish, lilting the words with no more care than she would have had for any other nursery rhyme. There once was a man with ears, you see, in the dead of the night he'll come for thee. He'll drag you into the woods so green, and there your bones he'll gnaw. Soon shall the bunny man come to take you away from your dad and mum. Soon shall the bunny man come, and your soul shall belong to him. I peeked around the corner of the doorframe and saw her on the floor playing with blocks, oblivious to what she was singing. Emily, where did you hear that song? She got up and walked to her bed, giggling as she crawled under the covers. From the funny lady. What funny lady? I asked, bending to tuck her in, but finding my hands incapable. She comes and sings at night sometimes, after you go to sleep. I'll wake you up so you can hear her next time. When I go to the window, she's standing on the street. She has ears on top of her hood, Mommy. Isn't that silly? I told her it was very silly, but I didn't feel like laughing in the least bit. Emily's in my bed now, sleeping soundly, as I pen this warning to anyone whose children have heard this song too. I'm afraid it's not an urban legend. It's not a hoax. The Bunny Man is real, and it seems that he's not alone anymore. He's coming for our children again, and I, for one, don't mean to lose my daughter to this creep or his children. As I lay here writing, I can almost hear it on the breeze, as if someone's singing it outside my window. Emily is stirring in her sleep. It appears it may not just have been in my head. I fear it may already be too late. It started as most things do, with boredom. I was surfing around YouTube, looking for funny videos or scary videos, when I stumbled across something that caught my interest. It was run by a user who went by The Meat Man, and it involved stop-motion footage using some very disturbing puppets. The thing that honestly caught my eye first was the thumbnail. It was a figure that appeared to be crafted entirely out of ground meat. I remember seeing the model and lifting an eyebrow as I took in what I was actually seeing. Now, when I tell you that the models were grotesque, I don't mean they were ugly or badly made. They were very well put together, and the amount of detail that had gone into them was astonishing. These meat puppets had hair and clothes and facial features that had all been meticulously crafted to the point of being a little uncanny. I would have almost expected them to blink or move on their own, and they seemed too lifelike for the medium. The episode I had found was episode 5, and as I watched it, I quickly began to realize that this was no normal bit of YouTube content. Episode 5 involved 3 characters, Lisa, Steve, and Michael, as they prepared for the arrival of a 4th character, Dawn. The background music was jangly and discordant, somewhere between a calliope and a merry-go-round, and it often made the voices hard to hear. The characters were cleaning up the house, which was mostly a sheet of paper with windows drawn near the ceiling, and some furniture crafted from modeling clay. As they cleaned, a voice told us how Lisa was being lazy and expected Michael and Steve to do the majority of the work. I remember thinking that was odd because her character moved and dusted and tidied at least as much as the others did, and they seemed to be working well together. After a few minutes of herky-jerky cleaning, a hand came down from the ceiling and congratulated Steve and Michael on a job well done. It then pointed a pudgy finger at Lisa and scolded her for being so lazy. The voice said that Lisa would not be allowed to join the party later, since she hadn't helped. As Michael and Steve walked off stage, Lisa's character curled into a ball as the loud party music played in the background. I remember feeling bad for Lisa as the last frame sat frozen in place, the camera zooming in on the prostrate Lisa, as she sat hunkered against the wall. Though I couldn't hear anything over the loud party music, I could see the small figure shaking a little as though she might be crying. What the hell was this? Why did it suddenly make me feel almost voyeuristic for watching the suffering of a lumpy knot person? After that, my morbid curiosity was hooked. I went to the attached channel and saw that he had about 10 videos up, all added within the last month or so. His channel was small, only about 80 subscribers, and they were all in that same stop-motion style, where he used the figure's grotesqueness to his advantage. I found the first episode, Friendship, and decided to watch it. The video was about Lisa, the meat puppet from before, and how she was sad and lonely all by herself. The puppet mostly sat in the same familiar position, bent over and appearing to sob. Suddenly, 2 other familiar puppets, Steve and Michael, came into the scene, and Lisa seemed happy to see them. The pudgy hand, whom she called Father, said that he had seen that she was lonely and had gotten her some friends so she wouldn't cry so much. The hand stroked her delicate hair, and it seemed to be much nicer to her than it had been in the previous episode. The 3 hugged and said they would be friends forever. Then the episode ended and the screen went black. It had lasted less than 5 minutes all told, but it still made me feel strange and put off. The puppets were so odd looking, and I just couldn't shake the feeling that there was something not right about them. I was also hooked, and immediately loaded up the second video. It was like a train wreck. I needed to see how it came out, no matter what the carnage looked like. The next 2 episodes were pretty similar to what I'd come to expect. They were called Cohabitation and Family, and followed the lives of Lisa and her new roommates. They set up some furniture and had some getting-to-know-you chatter as wonky music played in the background, making their words hard to hear sometimes. It was the typical stop-motion fare, but there were odd refrains sometimes in the middle of the stop-motion. During one in particular, the boys, Steve and Michael, were talking with Lisa about what they were going to make for dinner. The stop-motion abruptly cut, and you could see 5 or 6 seconds of the model just standing, as loud sobbing came from the background. Amidst that sobbing, there was a soft but angry voice trying to quiet them. I had to rewind it a few times in order to catch it, and I remember wondering if this were some sort of artistic film or something. Was the artist trying to make some kind of point? Maybe he was trying to hide it amidst the stop motion or something, make it even more artsy. It wasn't until the 4th episode that things got bad for Lisa. I noticed that while the first 3 episodes had come out one a day, the 4th video had taken almost a week to come out. This wouldn't have been strange for any other channel, but the total shift from episode 3 to episode 4 was alarming. The video was about 5 minutes long, and seemed to entail Lisa going out on her own for a night walk and getting lost. She had gone out for a walk, despite being told not to by Father Hand, and had gotten herself lost in a forest that seemed to be drawn on white paper. The trees were the big swampy kind you often saw in kids' art assignments, and it was clear that Father Hand was no artist. He wasn't a consistent narrator either, because his voice and his tone seemed to get angrier the longer the episode went on. The condition of the puppet looked ghastly, and that only added to the surreal horror of the show. The Lisa puppet was clearly in bad shape, and halfway through the show, a piece fell off of her and landed on the table. The narration ended abruptly, as the music continued over the visual of the graying puppet just standing in place. The sound of someone stomping off was audible over the jangly discord, and the steps sounded heavy and angry. There was a brief moment of someone begging to be let go, but it cut away just as the sound of screaming started. The video was edited poorly, and an attempt had clearly been made to cut it out. When the show resumed, the Lisa puppet was complete again, with what appeared to be a hunk of fresh meat attached. The piece that had fallen off, however, still lay on the table, as though it were no more useful than a snakeskin now. Towards the end of the episode, the Lisa puppet bent over and seemed to weep as she was alone and scared in the forest. This weeping was overlaid by a soft and frantic weeping in the background as well, though I'm not sure we were meant to hear that part. All of a sudden, the Father Hand came and showed her the way home. It scolded her for running away, and told her she must never do that again. Much like an actual father, the Hand seemed relieved as well as angry, and the meat Lisa went with him to the house meekly enough. When they returned, the Steve and Michael puppet did not seem happy to see her. They shunned her silently, and the episode ended with Lisa crying in a corner somewhere. Then the episode faded to black, and the credits rolled. I hovered my mouse over episode 6, not sure if I really wanted to watch it. Episode 4, called Thankless, made episode 5 make a lot more sense. Father Hand was still likely punishing Lisa for running away, though the start of the episode made it very clear that Lisa had just been going out for a walk. The episodes were easy enough to follow, but something in them still made me uneasy. Why were these characters living under this supposedly fatherly Hand character? Why did the narrator call them roommates if the Father Hand treated them like his children? The whole show was just odd and had a very surreal nature to it. There seemed to be an underlying story that I just wasn't getting. I was invested though, and I had to see how it came out. Episode 6 was the strangest by far, and the comments on the video seemed to prove that I wasn't just going crazy. It was called Melancholy, and the episode started with the same weird dance music and a shot of Lisa hunched up and crying. The crying, however, was not the canned sound it had been before. The episode was 3.5 minutes of someone sobbing heartbreakingly, the kind of sobs that are equal parts hopelessness and terror. The camera seemed to be slowly panning in on the intricate face of the meat puppet as the sobs in the background went on and on. I had seen some strange videos in my time, but this one definitely took the cake. The final shot was of the eye of the meat puppet, clearly defined and lovingly traced. You could see the meat beginning to mold, see the bright splotches that decorated the surface, and just before the screen faded to black, you could hear the elevated terror in the voice of the person sobbing before it was shut off by the end of the episode. I had to take a break after that one, reading the comments as I tried to make sense of what I had just watched. The Meat Man's audience seemed to be a little divided on whether this was an artistic expression or something much darker. A user had said that the sobbing and the screaming had been unique, and that they couldn't find it anywhere online, or at least on any of the free sites. Another user questioned whether they were too real or not, thinking this might be part of someone's torture fantasy, but others seemed to think it was just an avant-garde piece, and that was a little too pompous for its own good. What they did agree on was that even if it was acting, the screams were a little too real, and that they all felt some kind of way about those cries of anguish. I had hoped that maybe episode 7 would be a return to sanity, but episode 7, called Jealousy, was just as weird. The narrator was telling us that the Dawn character was adjusting very nicely to the house. All the tenants loved her, they all wanted to be her friend, and indeed Father Hand, Steve, and Michael were all standing around her and moving animatedly. Only one character, Lisa, didn't seem to want to be friends with Dawn. She seemed to be in another room, still hunkered up and crying. The narrator explained that Lisa was jealous of Dawn, and that Father was becoming cross with her attitude. The sobs from the previous episode were gone, but there were some other low noises, barely discernible over the loud jangling music. The puppets seemed to be in much better condition as well, and I suppose they had changed the meat out on them recently. The Father Hand came and yelled at Lisa some more, but she just stayed hunkered up and crying. Finally he left, and the episode ended as the camera zoomed in on the little meat woman hunkered in her anguish. I looked at the next episode and wondered if I really wanted to see more. It felt like I'd been watching for hours, but it turned out that all 7 episodes had taken less than 30 minutes. Something about watching the byplay between the characters had gripped me, and I felt that I needed to finish it. At the same time, there was something much darker here than I had expected. This was like someone's confession. The whole thing felt very intimate, and I felt almost voyeuristic for watching. I clicked the next episode though, telling myself that another 3 episodes wouldn't do much damage. How wrong I'd been. Episode 8, called Hatred, opened with Lisa leaning against a paper wall as the others tried to get in her room. They started out nicely asking her to come out, wanting to talk, wanting to see her. The narrator told us that Lisa had been shirking her chores and saying unkind things to Father Hand about the other roommates. Father Hand had, of course, shared these things with the others, and now they wanted to talk to her. As their knocking became pounding, all 3 of them pushing and pulling at the door as they banged and kicked, Lisa pulled her hands to her ears and put her head between her knees. The narrator told us how Michael and Steve wanted to talk, and how Dawn was really upset that Lisa would judge her so hastily. As they pounded and banged on the paper door, Father Hand suddenly came into the scene. Lisa looked up from her knees and seemed unsure of what to make of the sudden appearance of the fatherly phalange. Father Hand told her that she had brought discord to the house, and that he could no longer ignore her insolence. The hand turned itself into a fist and began to beat the puppet savagely. Chunks of meat fell off and were squashed beneath the pounding. The wire body was twisted and warped, and the whole scene was made all the more horrific by the overlaying carnival tune that scratched like razors across my brain. It ended as Steve and Michael knocked, and the camera zoomed in on the sad pile of meat that Lisa had become. The episode ended abruptly, and when I saw a pale figure staring back at me from the suddenly dark screen, it took a half a second to realize it was the sweating image of myself. Episode 9, Contrition, was next, and there was no question on whether I would watch it or not. I needed to know what came next. I needed to know how this ended. Episode 9 was as different from the others as night to day. It was a shaky cam of someone walking through the woods by night. A butter yellow light provided a small patch of illumination, and whoever was recording was breathing heavily as they trudged through the woods. The woods were preternaturally silent as they went, and the leaves crunching underfoot were loud enough to be jarring. The video was 4 minutes long, and 3.5 minutes were nothing but walking feet, crunching leaves, and heavy breathing. Then abruptly, they stopped before a small round stone, the ground before it freshly turned up and put to rest sloppily. "Sleep well, Lisa," came the phlegmy voice of the cameraman. Then it all went black again. I hit the 10th episode before I could think about it, wanting to see how it ended. Episode 10, Ambivalence, seemed to be a return to normal. Dawn was sitting on the couch, seeming to laugh at something on the TV that was out of view. Michael and Steve seemed to be milling about, cleaning up or just chatting. The wall that had marked Lisa's room was nowhere to be seen. The father hand looked over all of them, benevolently, as the narrator told us about Michael looking for a book he had misplaced, and Dawn watching her favorite TV show. All seemed well, all seemed normal, other than the broken corpse of Lisa that lay on the floor. The damage that Father Hand had done still lay about the ground, and the meat was brown and dry. Flies had begun to circle the meat body, and if one of the puppets had to go near her, they seemed to walk over her body without noticing her. The only character who seemed to notice her was the Father Hand. He would look down at her from time to time, almost smugly, and shake his head before looking back at the other puppets happily. Episode 10 went dark, and I was yet again left wondering what I had seen. The video seemed to have moved into my head rent-free, in less time than it would have taken to watch a movie. I had moved on to other videos, other activities, but the images were never far from my mind. I'd been known to suggest strange videos to friends of mine, even link them on Reddit to certain groups. This one, however, was not one of them. I was hesitant to talk about it, let alone tell people about it. I did not want others to suffer under this like I had, and that was probably why I was thinking about it when I saw the poster. I was traveling for work. I work as an expert witness for specific cases, and I do a lot of traveling and a lot of waiting, which often leads to the aforementioned boredom. I was driving through Michigan when a call to nature became too much to ignore, and I had to pull over at a nearby rest stop. I was heading to the bathroom when I saw the missing persons wall. My eyes found the woman before I could stop myself, and my breath caught in my throat as I came up short. The woman's name was Elizabeth Rainey, 23, and she'd been missing for the last 4 months. The poster was new, unmarred by yellowing or creasing, and I pulled it easily from the bulletin board. Looking at her face, I realized how much had gone into each of those puppets. Her nose, her wide forehead, the small dimple in her chin, the dent in her left cheek from some childhood accident. They were all there. They had all been lovingly added to the porous face of that meat puppet. I took the poster back to my car, my check-in time approaching quickly, and called a friend of mine who works with the local police department. I told him about the girl, about the YouTube channel, about the videos, and he said he'd look into it without much enthusiasm. When he called me about a week later to thank me for the information, he sounded much more interested in what I had to say. I called him again a few weeks ago and offered to buy him a drink if he'd sate my curiosity. He was willing, but said I might not want to know as bad as I thought. Over drinks, he told me the whole sad story. My friend had a friend too. His friend was an agent with the FBI, and after watching the videos, my friend had called his friend. He sent him a link to the channel and asked him to take a look. After his friend had watched the drama for himself, he had tracked the IP to see what he could find. Turned out that Elizabeth wasn't the only familiar face that was missing in the Michigan area. Michael Chavez, Steve Schwote, and Don Lee were also missing from the same area. The IP address was coming from an old house near Lake Huron. The owner, David Matthews, owned the house and quite a lot of the acreage out there. When they had raided his house, they had caught David by surprise and found more than they bargained for. He had been keeping them in his basement. The sick bastard had a large finished basement with 4 separate rooms. The central room held a couch, a TV, and a large kitchen table with a small set for the show and a camera. The puppets were on a shelf nearby, their bodies gray and sagging off their clothes hanger bodies. The other implement in the room was a large, rusty meat grinder. A meat grinder with strands of rotting meat hanging from the spout. He had said flies had been thick in the room, and the sounds of moans had not begun until they started kicking down doors. Dawn, Michael, and Steve had been laying in their respective rooms. Most of them, anyway, my friend had said, taking a long pull from his beer. He sent me the photos of the crime scene. I wish to God he hadn't. Dawn had been in the room that had likely once belonged to Elizabeth. David had been in the room that had likely once belonged to Elizabeth. He'd been wearing her dress, the fabric badly stretched around his frame, and was sobbing in the corner. No matter what the agents had said to him, his response was always the same, his rocking making a strange grinding noise as his bottom slid over the concrete. He kept saying, "I shouldn't have played God. I shouldn't have made her sleep." Again and again and again. The others didn't say much of anything. He had scooped them to the bone, cutting off fingers and toes, arms and legs, so he could grind them up to make those damn puppets. He'd used tourniquets and animal tranquilizers to keep them alive. Michael and Steve were a little more than torsos, Steve having half a leg and Michael a little more than an elbow. Dawn was missing her legs, but her arms were thankfully intact. She'd only been in the basement for a month, and it seemed he hadn't had much time to take from her. They had gotten all of them out of there, and David Matthews, the meat man, was now in custody. "A real win for the good guys," my friend had said, his stare 1,000 miles long, though none of them will ever walk again. The men are in a catatonic state, and the girl only gibbers, but at least we saved them before he could finish his sick little play. They had yet to find Lisa's body, but he told me they hadn't given up yet. As I sit here, going over the facts as I write, it all just runs through my head like a rat in a maze. Every moan, every sob was this sicko harvesting his victims so he could replace the flesh of his precious puppets. I was an unwilling participant in this, watching and encouraging this sick bastard to continue. I want to forget it, but I can't. I may never forget what I saw in that short hour of my life. I may never forget the terrible knowledge that the meat man has invested in me, and I may find my curiosity sated for quite some time. I think my days of roaming YouTube in my boredom may be at an end.